I am really not a presentation person. I'm not really a science person. But you know what? This is, well, I have to do it or I'm probably not going to get an A. But I've also found that I really actually do like this stuff, and it's pretty cool. I think putting a presentation together like this just really helps you kind of figure out how you see it and what your view is of it and how to describe it to somebody else. So I'm happy to have this opportunity, and here we go.
I can't help it. It's so beautiful.
A spiritual journey involves lots and lots of questions. When you study many religions, you begin to see fundamental pieces of the big picture. Viewing them separately, there always seems to be something missing, but when you view them together, something begins to come into focus. And like a spiritual kaleidoscope, sometimes you make one tiny turn and all the pieces just click, and you see something you never saw before. Why is this relevant? I think it's the same with science. Scientists sometimes spend decades working on a problem. They have pieces to work with, scientific discoveries from the past, as well as their own. But sometimes the pieces just don't fit together. It seems like the scientists who are open-minded and willing to see things in different ways, and who don't get discouraged and quit, are the ones who are making these incredible discoveries. They adjust and reassess and step back and readjust their theories, turning that kaleidoscope one bit at a time, until one day it all lines up perfectly, and there is a beautiful, perfect pattern that shines a new light on the nature of reality. And that has to be a spiritual experience.
In the 6th century BCE, the Greek philosopher Pythagoras is said to have discovered that those beautiful musical relationships were also beautiful mathematical relationships by measuring the lengths of the vibrating strings. In an octave, the string lengths create a ratio of 2 to 1. In a fifth, the ratio is 3 to 2, and in a fourth, it is 4 to 3. Pythagoreans worshipped the idea of numbers. The fact that simple ratios produced harmonious sounds was proof of a hidden order in the natural world, and that order was made of numbers. Plato's mathematical forms were the ideal version of the world around us, and they existed in their own realm. And however bizarre that may sound, that mathematics exists in its own world, shaping the world we see, it's an idea that to this day many mathematicians and scientists can relate to. The sense they have when they're doing math, that they're just uncovering something that's already out there.
If you look at nature, there are numbers all around us. You know, look at flowers, for example. So there are many flowers that have 3 petals like this, or 5 like this. Some of them may have 34 or 55. These numbers occur very often.
These may sound like random numbers, but they're all part of what is known as the Fibonacci sequence, a series of numbers developed by a 13th century mathematician. Fibonacci numbers show up in petal counts, especially of daisies. But that's just a start.
Statistically, the Fibonacci numbers do appear a lot in botany. For instance, if you look at the bottom of a pine cone, you will see often spirals in their scales. You end up counting those spirals. You will usually find a Fibonacci number, and then you will count the spirals going in the other direction, and you will find an adjacent Fibonacci number.
The same is true of the seeds on a sunflower head. 2 sets of spirals, and if you count the spirals in each direction, both are Fibonacci numbers. Since pi relates a round object, a circle, with a straight one, its diameter, it can show up in the strangest of places. Some see it in the meandering path of rivers. A river's actual length as it winds its way from its source to its mouth, compared to the direct distance, on average seems to be about pi.
In the water, as the frequency begins, every once in a while will reach a key threshold resonance. such as that moment right there. And in that key threshold resonance, the entire pattern morphed into a more complex expression of itself, simply because the frequency changed. Now watch what, as we reach another key threshold resonance, this entire pattern will morph into a beautifully and more complex pattern of itself, again and again. And look at this pattern right here. Look what you're seeing right here. Look at the beautiful geometry. Here is a perfect cube. There's a perfect tetrahedron, a star tetrahedron. In 2 dimensions, we've got the octahedron. Very powerful images of sacred geometry held in place simply because we've achieved the vibratory pattern that allows that in this water droplet.
Ouch. Sorry about that, folks. I guess we picked up a police frequency or something. It sometimes happens, and it can drive you crazy.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
If I were a character in a computer game that was so advanced that I were actually conscious and I started exploring my video game world, it would actually feel to me like it was made of real solid objects, made of physical stuff. Yet if I started studying the properties of this stuff, I would discover eventually that all these properties were mathematical. The mathematical properties that the programmer had actually put into the software that describes everything.
The laws of physics in a game are only mathematical rules created by a programmer. Ultimately, the entire universe of a computer game is just numbers and equations.
Could it be that our world also then is really just as mathematical as
Fractals are in our lungs, kidneys, and blood vessels.
Flowers, plants, weather systems, the rhythms of the heart, the very essences of life.
You can create a fractal by taking a smooth-looking shape and breaking it into pieces over and over again.
For each triangle, break it into 4 triangles, and then do that again, then again and again and again and again.
Endless repetition. What mathematicians call iteration. It's one of the keys to fractal geometry. You can see it in the clouds, in the mountains, even inside the human body.
The key to fractal geometry is that if you look on the surface, you see complexity, and it looks very non-mathematical. Think not of what you see, but what it took to produce what you see.
It takes endless repetition, and that gives rise to one of the defining characteristics of a fractal, what mathematicians call self-similarity.
If you look at something at this scale, and then you pick a small piece of it and you zoom in, it looks very much the same.
They go around the block. They come back. They go around again. They just go around and round. Round and round.
it may
may be that those other dimensions are all around us, just like the three that we know about, but they're tightly curled up to a very, very small size, so tiny that we can't see it with the naked eye or even with our most powerful equipment to date. If you're a little tiny ant and you're walking along one of these tiny dimensions, you circle around back to your starting point very quickly. You can't go very far in that dimension because it curls back in on itself, like a sphere or like a little tiny circle. And you go around it and you come back to your starting point. And if that circle or that sphere is so tiny that we don't have the visual acuity to pick it out,
The era of wireless communication. Using predictive power
To pull them apart.
radio, your satellites, the baby monitor, Wi-Fi, your garage GPS, and yes, even maybe your...
In quantum computing, it's a little different. What happens is you're really taking advantage of the basic quantum behavior of a system to compute certain kinds of things. Say 1,000-digit decimal digit number. It would probably take all the existing computers the age of the universe to factor that number. Whereas a quantum computer of appropriate size can do it in an hour.
At IBM, since I started, we're seeing breakthroughs pretty regularly, maybe every couple of weeks.
I think the thing that's really exciting right now is that on the experiment front, we're actually doing things that are making us think like, hey, this isn't 50 years off. This is maybe just 10 years off or 15 years off. It's within reach.
LIGO stands for Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. The W didn't fit in there, so we just hyphen it. LIGO's goal is to detect gravitational waves. Gravitational waves were predicted by Einstein's theory, but they have never been directly detected. We have very strong indirect evidence, and we all believe his theory, but we've never saw these waves directly, so that's what we want to measure them.
LIGO is inspiring kids and adults alike. Stargazers like these are actually becoming part of the action.
Oh, cool. Gravity waves are rumbles in space that they're searching for. They look for them a lot.
From these ranks may well come the next generation of gravitational wave explorers.
I hope I never stop stepping back and looking at the big picture and saying, instead of trying to get this one piece of electronics to work, I'm trying to detect gravity waves. And that's something that When you stop and you think about that, there's a moment of wonder there. You say to yourself, what on earth am I doing here? This is incredible.
I think that's what characterizes many scientists. They are people who never lost their childlike wonder about the universe, and they're still driven by that childlike wonder.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.